You are working the night shift, 1966. The ward has gone quiet the way hospitals only go quiet after midnight. The phone rings. You pick it up. A man's voice, calm, a little impatient, tells you he is a doctor. You have never heard this voice. You have never seen this man, but he knows your patient's name. He talks the way doctors talk, and he is in a hurry. Then he gets to the reason he called. Something in his tone tightens the way a voice does right before it asks for something it shouldn't. He wants you to give the patient 20 milligrams of a drug called Astroten. He will be in to sign for it in 10 minutes. You start walking toward the medicine cabinet. This is where you would love to believe the story stops, where you catch it, because there is plenty here to catch. Astroten isn't on your approved list. The box in your hand says 10 milligrams is the ceiling, and he just asked for double a doctor you cannot see, ordering a dose you cannot give over a phone that cannot carry his signature. Every wire is crossed at once. The whole thing hums wrong in your hand. You know all of this, you were trained on all of this, and 21 out of 22 of you reach for the bottle anyway. That number is not invented for effect. In 1966, a psychiatrist named Charles Hofling picked up that phone himself, on real nurses who had no idea a stranger was studying them. 22 got the call. 21 started measuring out the overdose with their own hands. An observer had to step out of the shadows and physically stop each one. A hand on the wrist, before the capsule, a harmless placebo, ever reached a patient. Nobody was harmed. That was the only thing that went right before you decide those women were careless or weak or built out of something softer than you. Hear the other half. Hofling wrote the exact same situation on paper and handed it to a different set of nurses. Would you obey this order? 31 out of 33 said no. Never. They spotted every red flag from across the room. They were certain. The certain ones and the obedient ones were the same kind of people. The only thing that changed was that one group held a survey and the other held the phone. I'm going to be straight with you in a way the internet won't. The internet sold you comfort. It told you that you would have hung up, that you are one of the 31, that you are the exception. The math does not care what you were told. You are the 21st nurse. Now sit with the harder question. Not what you did. Why? It is comforting to call those women foolish, and the comfort is a lie. They were not weak. They were not careless. Each of them stood inside a machine built to make refusal feel like the unreasonable choice, and you walk into that same machine without ever noticing the walls. The call pulled 3 levers. None of them touched your intelligence. All of them touched something underneath it. The first lever was a single word. Doctor, you never met him, never saw a face, never checked a badge. The title arrived in your ear already wearing the uniform, and the part of you trained to respect that uniform answered before the part of you trained to question the man could even wake up. You were not obeying a person. You were obeying a role he claimed in 4 syllables, and a role is heavy enough to move you with no face attached. The authority was borrowed. You loaned it to him for free. The second lever was the empty room. There was no one beside you, no other nurse to glance up across the ward, no eyebrow raised, no quiet wait. Does that sound right to you? That sentence, spoken by one other human being, breaks the spell almost every time, but nobody spoke it, because nobody was there to speak it. Doubt needs a witness to become a decision. You had only the phone in the dark hallway and a private misgiving that never got the chance to harden into a no. Hold on to that. It matters more than you think later. The third lever was the cleverest. He didn't ask you to harm a patient. He asked you to walk to the cabinet, then to measure, then to wait 10 minutes for a signature that lived safely in the future. The crime was deferred, sliced into steps so small that no single step ever felt like the one worth dying on. There was never a moment that announced itself as the moment. By the time the real decision arrived, you had already taken a string of smaller ones, and turning back would have meant admitting every step before it had been a mistake. Now you want to push it away. You tell yourself this is hospitals, that nurses are drilled to defer to doctors, that it has nothing to do with you and your spine. A psychologist in the early 1960s thought exactly what you're thinking right now. He looked at the camps in Europe at the ordinary men who had run them, and he was certain his own neighbors were made of something better, so he built a machine to prove it. And before he switched it on, he asked the experts how it would go. They told him almost no one would obey. They were not a little wrong. They were not even in the same universe as the truth. In a moment, you're going to sit in that chair. You will feel the exact spot where you are sure you would have stood up and walked out. Watch that spot closely. It is the same place where almost every one of them was just as sure right before they didn't. Right before they didn't. So you sit down. The chair is harder than you expected. In front of you runs a long panel, and across it sits a row of switches, 30 of them left to right like teeth. The first one reads 15 volts. The last one reads 450. Each switch is 15 volts higher than the one before it, and above each switch a little word climbs as you go. Slight shock, moderate, strong, very strong, intense, extreme intensity. Then a darker label, still danger, severe shock. The last two switches do not bother with words at all, just 3 letters, stamped where the warnings used to be, XXX. The learner is a pleasant middle-aged man. He shook your hand a few minutes ago and mentioned lightly that he had a mild heart condition. Now he is strapped to an electrode in the next room, and your job is simple. He gets a word wrong, you move up one switch, every single time. At first it is nothing, a buzz. He grunts. You climb, because the next answer is wrong, and the one after that. Somewhere past the middle he starts to protest, his voice coming through the wall. He says it hurts. He says he wants to stop. You keep going, because the panel keeps going, and the man beside you in the gray lab coat has not moved then around 300 volts. He pounds on the wall. You feel it more than hear it. The next question comes, and there is no answer. No pounding. No voice. Silence is its own kind of scream, and you feel it under your finger on a switch you have not pressed yet. So you turn to the lab coat to say you're done. You wait for him to grab your arm to threaten you. He does none of that. He looks at you, calm as a clock, and he says 4 sentences in order, please continue. The experiment requires that you continue. It is absolutely essential that you continue. You have no other choice. You must go on, that is it. No force. 4 flat sentences, and the only thing pinning you to that chair is the sound of a calm man's voice. Before any of this ran, experts were asked how many people would obey to the very end. They guessed almost no one, maybe 1 in 1,000. A rare, broken individual. Here is the truth. Every single one of the 40 people who sat where you're sitting went to at least 300 volts. Not one stopped before that. And 26 of them, about 2/3, 65%, pushed every switch to the last one, to XXX. Now hold this next part, because it is the coldest part of all. The screaming you have been imagining belongs to a different run of this study, where the man begged and clutched his heart and then went silent. In that screaming version, 25 of 40, 62.5%, still finished, in the quiet baseline where he was mostly silent behind a wall. 65% finished whether he screamed or stayed silent, barely moved the number. About 2/3 went all the way either way. Hearing him beg did not save him. And that is not even the frightening part, because this number was never fixed. It was a dial, and Milgram could turn it. With one small change to how close you stood to that man, he pushed obedience close to 9 in 10. He did it without making anyone meaner. That is the part that should keep you up at night. Milgram did not breed a worse class of person. He simply moved your hand off the lever and let someone else push it down. In that version, you only read the word pairs aloud while a second man delivered the shock. You were a cog, and 37 of 40 went all the way to the end, 92.5%, the highest obedience of any condition he ever ran, and it came not from cruelty but from convenience. The further you sit from the act, the lighter the act feels in your hands. Now run the dial the other direction. Drag that suffering man into the same room, close enough to hear him, close enough to watch his face go wrong, and full obedience collapses to 40%. 16 of 40 cut the distance again. Make a person press the victim's own hand down onto a metal shock plate, skin against skin, and it drops to 30%. 12 of 40, same authority, same script. The lab coat still insisting you must continue. The only thing that changed was how far you stood from the harm you were causing. So understand what that means about you. You are not at your most dangerous when you feel hatred. You are at your most dangerous when you feel nothing at all, when you are one clean step removed, and can tell yourself you were just reading the words, just passing it up the line, just doing your part of a process someone else designed, which is exactly what the night ward was built to do. The nurse never saw a patient gasp. She never watched a body seize. There was only a phone, a cabinet, an unsigned order with a stranger's borrowed name on it. Every link in that chain put another meter between her hand and the harm. The distance was not an accident of the call. The distance was the call. So that is one dial. How close you stand to the person you might hurt. But there is a second dial, and it is not the man in the lab coat. It is the people standing on either side of you. A crowd does not only lean on you to comply, a crowd can reach into your eyes and quietly rewrite what you believe you're looking at. An empty room was Hofling's lever. No one beside you to catch your eye, no second voice to turn doubt into a decision. But there is an opposite lever, and it is just as strong. Fill the room. Surround you with agreeing faces, every one of them calm and certain. And watch what happens to a thing you would have sworn was beyond argument. Watch what happens to your own eyes. Solomon Asch built the trap out of nothing but lines. You sit with a group, 7 to 9 people, and you're shown one line and 3 others to compare it to. The match is obvious. A child could call it, "There is no trick in the cardboard. The trick is the people." Every one of them is an actor, and on 12 of 18 rounds they say the same wrong answer out loud, confidently, before your turn ever comes. Alone. This is not even a test. People get it right more than 99% of the time. The error rate by yourself sits under 1%. You see the line? The line is the line. But under the weight of that confident, lying group, people went along with the wrong answer on about 37% of the rigged rounds. Not everyone, and not every time. About 3/4 of people caved at least once. About a quarter held firm through the whole thing and never bent. Keep those two numbers apart because they matter. A third of the moments. 3 out of 4 of the people here is where it stops being a story about manners. Decades later, Gregory Burns ran a version of this inside a brain scanner. When people went along with the group, the activity showed up in the visual and perceptual regions, not the planning and decision regions. Read that carefully, and honestly, it is correlational. The study was small and no one rewired your retinas, but it hints at something colder than peer pressure. The pressure may reach as deep as how you see, not just what you're willing to say. And when someone stood alone against the crowd, the amygdala lit up. The felt cost of dissent, the price of being the one who is wrong on purpose, so you may not feel yourself folding. It can feel like simply seeing what everyone else sees. Distance bends what you will do. The crowd bends what you will see, which leaves one question that neither room could answer. What exactly is happening inside your skull while you obey? Milgram had a theory, and it is the most unsettling idea in all of this. He called it the agentic state. In ordinary life, you feel like the author of your own actions. You decide, you act, you own the result. But step under an authority that looks legitimate, and something shifts. You stop feeling like the author. You start feeling like the instrument, a tool carrying out somebody else's will, and the responsibility quietly floats upward, away from your hands and onto theirs. It is a hypothesis, not a settled law, and the evidence complicates it in a way you should sit with. Milgram's most direct order, the one that sounds like pure command, "You have no other choice, you must go on," was the weakest of all his prods. The harder he pushed, the more people pushed back. So this was never simply people taking orders. Something subtler was doing the work underneath. Then the scanners arrived, and they found that subtler thing. In 2016, a researcher named Emily Casper measured your sense of agency directly. When you freely choose to act, your brain knits your action and its consequence tightly together in time. Press a key, hear a tone, and the gap between them feels short because the result is yours. Casper put people under orders. The gap stretched, the brain spaced the action and the outcome further apart as if the result belonged to someone else. The neural response to that outcome was dampened too, a measurable signature of the words "I was only following orders," written in the brain before the mouth ever speaks them. 4 years later, she went further. People obeying orders delivered more real shocks than people choosing freely. And the regions tied to empathy and guilt, the anterior cingulate cortex and the anterior insula, responded less to the victim's pain. Obedience turns down the volume on your own conscience. Be precise here, because the honest version is stronger than the scary one. This is not a switch that erases you. A later study found that agency can be preserved under orders, that holding onto it is an active effort tied to a region of the frontal cortex, and that people differ in how well they manage it. You're not a robot. You are a person whose sense of responsibility can be quietly dialed down, if you let it. So when the lab coat says you must go on, you're not lying afterward when you say you felt you had no choice. Your brain made it feel that way. So are you simply built to cave? No. And the proof is a second hospital, where someone changed 3 small things and the nurses said no. Stop for a second. Pull yourself out of the trance you have been sliding into. For several minutes now, you have been quietly accepting a verdict about yourself that you are wired to fold, that the 21st nurse lives inside you and always will. I need you to hear this plainly. You are not doomed to obey, and the proof comes from a second hospital. 11 years after Hofling, 2 researchers named Stephen Rank and Cardell Jacobson walked back into that same scenario and changed 3 small things. First, they swapped the made-up Astroten for Valium, a drug every nurse on the floor already knew in her hands and in her bones. Second, the order no longer came from a faceless voice on a phone. It came from a real doctor on staff, a person with a name and a face. Third, and this is the one that matters most, the nurses were free to turn to a colleague before they touched a thing. Watch what happened to the machine. The obedience that looked like a law of nature simply collapsed. Out of 18 nurses, only 2 went along with it. 16 refused. The same profession, the same uniform, the same pressure from above, and the number flipped almost completely the other way. So look hard at what Hofling's 95% actually was. It was never human nature. It was never some rot at the center of you. It was manufactured, assembled out of 3 ingredients: isolation, a drug you could not recognize, a stranger you could not verify. Strip those away, hand a person knowledge and one other human being to lean on, and obedience falls apart in their hands. That is the reframe that changes everything. The machine is not destiny, the machine is built from conditions, and conditions can be unbuilt. Remember the seed I planted earlier, that doubt needs a witness to become a decision. The second hospital just gave your doubt a witness. If obedience is a set of dials, then someone has been turning them against you your whole life. Now you learn to turn every one of them back. So here's how you turn the dials back. Every lever that built your obedience runs in both directions, and the strongest one is almost embarrassingly simple. Break the unanimity. In Milgram's lab, when 2 fellow teachers refused and walked out of the room, obedience did not bend. It collapsed. 65% fell to about 10. Asch found the same thing from the other side. A single ally who gave the right answer cut conformity to about a quarter. One visible no is not just one person's choice. It is permission handed to everyone watching to refuse. Here is the part that should change how you think about every meeting, every group chat, every room where the pressure builds. That ally does not have to be right. In Asch's experiment, even a dissenter who gave a different wrong answer set people free. The active ingredient was never correctness. It was the broken wall. Any single crack in a unanimous front is enough to let the rest of us breathe, but the no has to hold. When Asch's ally later switched back and rejoined the majority, conformity snapped right back up to where it had been. The protection lasts exactly as long as someone keeps saying it. Dissent is not a moment, it is a position you have to keep standing in. Then close the distance, refuse to be the cog who only reads the words off the page. The cruelty got easy when the harm was abstract and outsourced to someone else's hand, so make the consequence concrete and make it yours. When Milgram put the victim in the same room, obedience dropped to 40%. Once the subject had to press the man's hand down onto the plate, it fell to 30. Proximity to what you're doing is its own defense. Challenge the legitimacy and challenge its costume. Strip away the prestige, put an ordinary man in street clothes, giving the same orders, and obedience dropped to about 20%. Question the credential, doubt the setting, distrust the uniform, ask the question the 22nd nurse would have asked: who exactly are you, and how do I verify that? And notice when authority finally shows its teeth, because that is when it is weakest. Milgram's most forceful command, "you have no other choice," was the least effective prod he had. A naked order triggers resistance. Power works best dressed up as cooperation, and worst when it starts shouting. Stay emotionally present. Keep the person who could be harmed real and close in your mind, because that alone protects you. Remember the seed from earlier: doubt needs a witness to become a decision. Be that witness, for the room and for yourself. Which brings us back to that ward in 1966, and the one nurse who did not reach for the bottle. So go back. Back to the ward at midnight. The corridor empty, the cabinet locked, the phone ringing into the quiet. Back to 1966, and a voice that calls itself a doctor, and an order that doubles the safe dose of a drug nobody has cleared. 21 of those 22 nurses started down the hall toward that cabinet. One did not. We do not know her name. We do not have a transcript of what she said, or whether she said anything at all. The records do not preserve her face, so I will not put words in her mouth. That history never recorded. What we can say is small and exact. She did not take the first small step on an unverifiable voice. She made the order wait. She did not let the phone do her thinking for her. That is the whole of it. She did not need to be braver than the other 21. She did not need to be smarter or kinder or harder. She needed one thing they did not have in that moment. She could see the walls, the borrowed authority of a single word, the isolation with no witness in the room, the crime sliced thin enough to swallow. Those walls were standing around all 22 of them, identical, invisible. The difference was that one woman somehow looked up and saw the shape of the room she was standing in. You have spent all this time looking at the shape of that room. The dial Milgram could turn, the levers that move you without your permission. The number that climbs toward 9 and 10, when a man with no claim on you simply stands close enough. The math has not changed. You are still the 21st nurse by default, the way almost everyone is. but you are no longer the nurse who cannot see the walls, and that is the only inheritance the 22nd nurse ever left you. There will be no lab coat in the room when it happens to you, no click on the line, no crowd to hide inside, only a voice in a cabinet, and you which nurse you are will be decided in that silence alone and by no one but you.